Pro Football Focus thinks Oregon has the best wide receiver room in all of college football, and that says a lot about how this staff recruits. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks, which is why if you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show. Lots to get to today, including that Boise State factor. We'll talk about Boise State later. We'll talk about Oregon's receiver room. And Oregon baseball is getting ready for the Super Regional. Everything you need to know on that front. But we start with the receiver room. Pro Football Focus had the internet a-buzzing, and I'm sure certain fan bases were not particularly thrilled with their assessment. They think Oregon has the best receiver room in all of college football, which is a crazy statement. I'll get to the validity of that statement as it pertains to where they actually sit compared to other big-time receiving corps. I think there is absolutely an argument here. But just the fact that you can make that argument is a testament to the job Junior Adams has done. And when you talk about the most high-profile assistant coaches on this Dan Lanning staff, Junior Adams has to be near the top of the list. Would he be at the top of the list? You can make that case just like you can make the case they have the best receiver room in college football. Because this is not a position group that Oregon has historically been able to recruit. There is something to the idea of recruiting players to a school when you are known for churning out high-profile guys at that position. Ohio State, wide receivers. LSU used to be defensive backs, now kind of receivers and quarterbacks. Alabama, edge guys and offensive linemen. Certainly, it doesn't mean there are only good players coming from that school. But when you don't have that sort, for Oregon, I think the strongest position they've recruited throughout my entire life has been running back. Give me the last time you felt like Oregon was lacking in the running back department. I've literally never felt that way. I have never felt that way, which is incredible. Now, that's a testament to Gary Campbell, who was on Oregon staff for a long time across multiple head coaches. He did an incredible job, but every guy who has picked up the running back position moniker since then has also done a fantastic job on the trail. And so that position, I think, has become more identifiable, where you have guys that can make that connection of, I remember watching LaMichael James, I remember DeAnthony Thomas, or I watched Royce Freeman have a great career. That sort of stuff makes it easier to recruit that position. But you look at wide receiver now. When Oregon was getting onto the national stage, when I was a kid, the wide receiver room was nothing to write home about. There were good players. Jeff Mail is still my favorite Oregon receiver of all time. That's never going to change. I would take him on any team, any scheme, anytime. Jeff Mail, 7 days a week, 10 out of 10 5 stars. He was not literally a 5-star recruit, but that's where Oregon is of course at now, where they expect to be able to go after 5-star recruits. And they have landed 5-star guys like Jurion Dickey, or they're going after DeCorian Moore, or you've got Gatlin Bear committed, and he'll be on campus in a couple of years, a 2024 recruit who's taking a 2-year mission. I think they've just done such a remarkable job, because that receiver position was always just it was okay. You had some good players. You had Josh Huff, Braylon Addison, Jeff Mail, Lavassier Tuane, good players. There's no way that any recruiting service, any college football analyst metric, any computer-generated function, whatever, would have said Oregon has the best receiving core in all of college football. So the fact that they do is just wildly impressive. I mean, you don't just have to recruit guys via high school and the transfer portal, but you got to be able to develop them and get them to produce. And I think that Oregon had an exceptional receiving core last year, and I don't expect there to be any drop-off because it's basically the same. You got an NFL caliber guy coming in Evan Stewart to replace an NFL caliber guy in Troy Franklin, who I'm excited to see on the Broncos with Bo Nix and prove the people that passed over him in the NFL draft wrong. And then you have Tez Johnson, and then you have Trayshawn Holden, and then you have Gary Bryant, and it's just all kind of the same guys. So I think the talent acquisition's been tremendous. Now, as to that particular claim, do they have the best in all of college football? Look, I'm very high on Trayshawn Holden. I'm a big fan. And the Fiesta Bowl made me even more of a fan because Troy Franklin opted out of that game to get ready for the NFL draft, and you didn't have any transfers coming in for that game. So Trayshawn Holden had to step up and be the primary X receiver. I thought he looked like a number one guy. Now, I'm big on Evan Stewart. I don't know who isn't. I mean, that looks like a first or second round NFL wide receiver in my book, but apparently when guys look like that at Oregon, they don't get drafted there. We'll just see how that plays out. But Evan Stewart is widely considered to be an NFL prospect, as he should be. And if they hadn't brought him in, I would still like this Oregon receiving core. That's a crazy thing to say, that I would feel confident in this group and their ability to produce and give Dylan Gabriel and the offense what they need to succeed at a high level if you didn't bring in a guy who is an early round NFL draft pick. Because I think Trayshawn Holden showed in that game and has showed in other glimpses that he's capable of a lot. He's the number 3 receiver on this team. I think on the right offense, Trayshawn Holden could be a solid, maybe not high end, but still pretty darn good. Like a really, really solid number 1. I think he could be a high-end number 2. And he's the number 3. I don't know how much better it can get. I really don't. I think last season and this season are the best receiving cores I've ever seen at Oregon. And the fact that they go 4 deep and then have a couple of big-time prospects who haven't had the chance to play yet, that are waiting in the wings, in Jurion Dickey and Kyler Casper, that's maybe the biggest testament. Jurion Dickey was seen, now he had an injury last year, and so maybe he has a bigger role this season, kind of in that Gary Bryant Jr. spot. I think certainly he's on the 2 deep in the wide receiver room. If you've got, your slot and then your X and Z receivers on the outside, I have a hard time seeing Jurion Dickey not be on the 2 deep there, and Kyler Casper as well. But at a lot of other schools, and I'm not just talking, middle of the conference or bottom of the conference school, I'm talking big time programs, you'd see a guy like Jurion Dickey or like Kyler Casper playing early in their careers. They can't crack the depth chart. Or they can crack it, but they can't really see the field consistently. They're not getting the ball thrown their way. They're not a big part of the offense because the guys in front of them have just been too good. So I love where Oregon's receiver room is at. There are plenty of fan bases that will not like the idea that Oregon has the best receiver. I think it's just kind of that shock factor of like, Oregon? They've had 1 receiver drafted in the first 5 rounds in the last 5 years, which I'm pretty sure is true. I think Dylan Mitchell might have been like an undrafted free agent, but even you look at, the height of the recruiting era under Mario Cristobal, they didn't have receivers like this. Like, look at that receiving core, which had some decent players, and compared to this receiving core, night and day. Night and day. You wonder why Justin Herbert's numbers in college weren't spectacular? His receiving core, pretty average. But this is a well above average receiving core, and according to Pro Football Focus, best in the country. How about that? What a time to be alive. We got something to talk about coming up next. And that thing is Boise State. It is Boise State. We also got to talk about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. It is perhaps my favorite part of the show. I said perhaps, it's in the running. Mailbag time. YouTube comments or X, formerly known as Twitter, at @McLaughlinCFB or at Locked On Ducks. DMs and mentions wide open. Those are the handles. If you want priority access and all sorts of other perks, go join the flock over at Subtext as well. That link in the description below, wherever you listen to or watch this show. Mighty_Oregon sends in this one. Mailbag question. Hey, Spencer, the last time Oregon played these teams, they won and we lost. Idaho, Boise State, and Washington. We play all three of these teams this season. Can the Ducks beat all of them this season? Revenge? Let us know in one of your upcoming shows. Go Ducks. First of all, just a quick correction. I think you corrected yourself later in the YouTube comments when this got submitted. Oregon has never lost to Idaho, which used to be an FBS program, by the way. You go back and look at the conference affiliation history of Idaho, kind of interesting. They've been all over the place. They were FBS. They've dropped down to FCS, and the Kibbe Dome is kind of sweet. I have been to the Kibbe Dome before. It's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool spot to play a football game. The crowd can get roaring and whatnot. But Idaho's never beaten Oregon. The all-time series history there per the Idaho website, they've got it listed, and Oregon does not, is 0-3-1 in favor of the Ducks, meaning there was a tie. A tie. Leave the ties for soccer. Okay. So the Idaho, okay. No one's gonna have a problem there. I'm gonna be at that game, and I'm very excited about it. August 31st, Autzen Stadium. It'll be the first time I've been at Autzen in about 7 years, which is a tragedy, but such is the way of life when you go all over the country, going to school and working and such. Washington, I got to be honest, I don't know if I have the energy for Washington today. Why don't we save that one for a future show? Let's talk Boise State. So Boise State is not a team that Oregon fares well against. If you remember the first game of the Mario Cristobal era, which began, wait for it, with a timeout. This is the first offensive play that Mario Cristobal's Oregon team ran. I remember the tweet from Rob Mosley. That might be my favorite Rob Mosley tweet of all time. I might need to get him back on the show just to ask him about that. And I tweeted it out. The Mario Cristobal era begins with ... a timeout. Oregon went on to lose the game in the Las Vegas Bowl. Herbert was back, but Taggart was gone. Freeman opted out, and it was just a whole debacle. And then there was the game in 2008 at Autzen Stadium. That didn't go very well. In 2009 at Boise, that somehow went worse. It went much worse. This is not a Boise State team that is to be trifled with. Oregon's at home. That should give you a lot of confidence. They have lost once. Just the one time in the Dan Lanning era at Autzen Stadium, and that was to two guys who thankfully are gone. They are long gone and not going to play for that team up in Seattle anymore or coach for them. So that's the good news. The bad news is that though Dan Lanning hasn't seen Boise State before, and most of these players haven't seen Boise State before, that energy can kind of percolate and kind of filter its way up to the highest level sometimes, or at least it feels that way as fans. I think that's a very, very natural reaction there. And the other thing is Boise State is going to be a good team. So for those who are unaware, and this is of course why perhaps you tune into the show, which I very much appreciate, I gather such information or follow over at Locked On College Football. Boise State last year had our old friend Andy Avalos, former defensive coordinator of the Ducks, as their head coach. Things were not going well last season, and they relieved him of his duties. They promoted to be the interim head coach Spencer Danielson, who was Andy Avalos' defensive coordinator. And then they won their last two games of the regular season and the Mountain West Championship. What are you going to do? Not hire that guy? Spencer Danielson might have just caught lightning in a bottle to parlay his way into, I use parlay subconsciously because I just watched Pirates of the Caribbean, but to parlay his way into the head coaching job at Boise, which is one of the premier group of 5 head coaching jobs in all of college football. I think that, it might be the best one. They might be the biggest group of 5 brand out there. I'm trying to think of a bigger one now that, Cincinnati, Houston, UCF are all in the Big 12. Is there a better G5 job out there? Maybe not. So he wins 2 games, gets him to the title game, wins that, then goes to the LA Bowl and loses what ended up being Chip Kelly's final game coaching as the head coach at UCLA. And so Danielson is the head coach. It's a very small sample size. He might not be any good. The small sample size is that he is very good. You win a conference championship game. It's pretty good. This is pretty darn good. Now, they brought in Malachi Nelson, a 5-star quarterback transfer from USC, who did not play over there, which can be telling for sure, just like Ty Thompson not playing at Oregon is telling of something. However, like Ty Thompson, this kid is immensely talented. He's going to have Ashton Genty at running back, who's one of the best running backs in all of college football, regardless of Group of 5, Power 4, whatever. He is an absolute stud. And they have some receivers to work with as well. It'll come down to Malachi Nelson, because if you got a former defensive coordinator who you promoted to be your head coach, he's probably going to be pretty good. Probably going to be pretty good on that side of the ball, at least you would hope. And it'll come down to how good he is. I've seen Malachi Nelson in person. He's every inch of 6'5", and he can absolutely spin the ball. I mean, he's just got to rock. It's about all the little things. Got all the arm talent like Ty Thompson, but you just got to be able to put it all together. So that's the Boise State game. Like that's kind of the game at a glance. And if you have any more questions about it, of course, submit them away. Mailbag is always open, like I always say. But I like Oregon's chances in that game. Should they overlook? No. I mean, you shouldn't overlook anybody. You can't overlook Boise. And I don't think Oregon fans should. The Ducks will be a sizable favorite, but the Broncos are the favorites in the Mountain West this year. They don't get that moniker by accident. FanDuel doesn't give them the highest total in the Mountain West or give them the best odds to win the conference by accident. They should be a good Mountain West team. That said, Oregon's trying to compete for a national championship. It shouldn't pose much of a problem. A couple questions here from Bud. Why is it that very few universities are elite in both football and basketball? It seems they get labeled as one or the other. For example, USC and UCLA, Kansas and Kansas State. Yeah, so to tie this to Oregon, because obviously this is an Oregon show, it's one of the things I very much appreciate about Rob Mullins, the athletic director. It is hard to be good at more than one sport because you have to have, like, running a program requires so many people behind the scenes. You have to have an athletic department and an athletic director that is fully committed to making that sport the best it can be. You got to give them the resources that they need. You got to give them the funding that they need. You got to give them access now to NIL dollars so that they can bring in the sort of players. From an athletic director standpoint, you also have to care. If standards start to slip, you got to hire a new head coach. Think about Mark Helfrich. He had 2 great seasons as head coach. Well, actually 3 pretty good seasons, frankly. And then he collapsed in the Alamo Bowl. And, Vernon Adams getting hurt. That did not help in any way, shape, or form. Then they go 4-8. Boom, you're done. That's what a high standard program does. When you say, hey, we expect to win at a high level, compete at the highest level, play at the highest level consistently, not going to tolerate down seasons. Goes out and, starts the whole coaching carousel that we've been on for the last several years. But that's what it comes down to. Like, there's a historical component as well as to, like, you can find random instances of, this program is great and there isn't really a rhyme or reason. Like, why is Oregon State baseball great? They hired the right coach. And then when they hired that coach, Mike Riley, I can't believe I said that. I'm actually embarrassed that I said that. Really embarrassed that I said that. Like, I really can't believe I just confused Mike Riley and Pat Casey. I've met Pat Casey's son before. Yikes. I hope he doesn't see or listen to this show. He's an Oregon State guy, so probably not. But you hire the right coach, and then you do what is required to keep that coach. So UCLA football, for instance, I don't think that's a serious program. They hired a great defensive coordinator in D'Anton Lynn. They let him walk to USC. Unserious program. Not going to be great. Not fully committed. That's what it comes down to, is buy-in. One more quick mailbag question here. Actually, we're going to have to save that one for another day. But yeah, I like that question. And Oregon's athletic department, consistently one of the best in the entire country. I mean, volleyball is really good. Softball was at a regional again. Baseball, I'm going to talk about, it's in a super regional again. Like, there is a desire and a commitment. And those are the 2 things that you need. Not every place has that. It can come down to dollars. It can come down to money. But that's what it takes. And that's the difference. Oregon baseball has been on that upward trajectory. They've got a tough super regional ahead of them. I'll talk about that next. Alrighty, so for my everydayers out there, you are probably well aware that this show is coming out significantly later than normal. The reason is I was trying to coordinate a time to talk with Jared Mack ahead of Oregon's Super Regional performance or game this weekend, or the first of a 3-game series. That first pitch is 11 a.m. Pacific time on ESPN2 against Texas A&M. Unfortunately, we weren't able to work it out, but that's why I was planning to drop the show later today. But 11 a.m. Saturday morning, ESPN2, Oregon baseball. Fantastic exposure for the program. A second straight Super Regional. Very, very impressive stuff. Here's the straightforward version of going to play Texas A&M. This is going to be bleeping hard. It is just going to be hard. Now, the reason is that Texas A&M offensively looks like what Oregon did last year. They've maintained that level, but then their pitching has upped the ante. Right? Oregon has been a more pitching-dominated team this year than they were a season ago, which is great, but the bats have been cold. Bats are going to have to keep up because runs are going to be scored. So like Oregon, Texas A&M went 3-0 in their regional. They were hosting against Grambling, Texas, and 22nd ranked Louisiana. They beat each of those teams once. Boom, boom, boom. They're on to the Super. So neither one of these teams have lost in their last several games. Their premier hitter, Texas A&M's, is Braden Montgomery, who was the most outstanding player in that College Station regional. And he was 6 for 15, homer, 5 RBIs, and that's swinging a hot bat. He is going to run into some red-hot Oregon arms, though. The pitching matchups, as reported by the aforementioned Jared Mack, who is not intensely confident Oregon's going to get out of this, but guess what? You just have to believe. Just give it a little bit of hope. RJ Gordon against Ryan Prager on Saturday, and then, or that's game 1, and then game 2, Grayson Grinsell against Shane Sadow, and Texas A&M hasn't named a Game 3 starter if there ends up being a Game 3, and that would be Kevin Sider for the Ducks. So I think that for Oregon, going back to the well, like they kind of tried the Brock Moore experiment, pitching as a starter in the Pac-12 tournament. I think that was worthwhile. These guys are just way too hot. And those games will be Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday if necessary. If you remember, Oregon last year won Game 1 against Oral Roberts, almost had Game 2, and then ran out of pitching in Game 3. But the good news is I feel good about all 3 of Oregon's starters because RJ Gordon, Grayson Grinsell, and Kevin Sider all just dealt. They were all 3 outstanding. Now, you're going up against a hot Texas A&M lineup that this season is 4th nationally in total home runs, 12th overall in runs scored, 18th in the country at 8.7 runs a game. That's a pretty big number. But their pitching staff has made a massive leap from last year to this year under their new pitching coach. And that just makes for a tough team. They're the number 3 or 4 overall team in the country, according to college baseball polls. They're the number 3 overall seed in this NCAA baseball tournament. So Oregon has to win 2 or 3. And that, look, as I said going into the regional, which on paper, Oregon shouldn't have come out of. They were not playing great baseball. They barely got into the regionals, an at-large team in the first place, and they didn't lose a game. It is baseball. Postseason baseball, anything could happen. So do not look at, Texas A&M and say, oh, well, yeah, just no hope there. Now, this isn't like being an unranked team playing the number 3 team in all of college football. Oregon's got a better chance here against Texas A&M than Boise State does against Oregon when they play on September 7th. So if that helps you conceptualize things, then great. If not, you get to hear it anyway. So I give Oregon a chance because if you can pitch, you can always stay in it. They got to get the bats going, which leads me to this question to end this week of shows. Beginner Catholic says, question for the pod, which Duck do you think will need to have a dream visit from Babe Ruth in order to win it all? Well, how fortuitous that you mention a left-handed hitting power guy. Jacob Walsh has to hit dingers. Or at least hit the ball. I mean, he took the cap off in that last game against UC Santa Barbara, and boy, it was a well-timed blast. Overall in the postseason, though, he has not been his usual self. And that's the guy. That's the guy that Oregon needs to have as a threatening bat. They have other guys that can hit home runs, but Jacob Walsh is Oregon's all-time leading home run hitter, and he just has not been the same at the plate. He's chasing a lot of pitches. He's got to see something early in this series and get himself going. It doesn't have to be a home run. It could be a single, double, whatever. Like just something to remind himself how good of a hitter he is, because I think he's forcing the issue in a big, big way right now. He needs a visit from the ghost of Babe Ruth to come through and just ignite his bat so that he can have a most outstanding player caliber series, because he can be that sort of hitter. We've seen it over the last several years. That's what he can be. And he plays a good first base. I love the pitching, and I love the defense from this Oregon team. Carter Garrotti at third, Maddox Maloney at short. That's a mean left side of the infield, and Drew Smith is no slouch at second base. And, of course, the legend Bryce Betcher out roaming center field and catching everything in sight. I think this team's got a chance. They've got a real chance, but they're going to have to hit a little bit more, because though it's hard to feel anything but great about these starting pitchers, you're not going to hold teams to 4 runs, or hold Texas A&M to 4 runs or fewer the way they did to the teams in the regionals. Like, that was great. That was outstanding. This is the next level. This is another level of a lineup. It's probably the best lineup Oregon has faced all year. I mean, Oregon State and Arizona, both very, very good teams. I don't know if they're as potent statistically as the Aggies, who I will end you with this particular note that I almost forgot. Texas A&M's head coach, who has been very successful. They're in the Supers for the second time in their last 3 seasons. Oregon's in the Supers for second time in the last 2 years. His name is Jim Schlossnagle. Schlossnagle. Jim Schlossnagle. Yeah, we're ending the show on that. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.